To each of you, we're thankful for your presence this morning. And if you see on the screen, we'll be basing the lesson off of a statement made in the book of Revelation. So if you turn there, we'll be looking at verse 8 and some other places. I hope that you all have a blessed new year, that everything will go in a great spiritual direction for us all, even though the outward man may be perishing. Our inward man can be renewed, starting today and every day, being renewed day by day. This particular lesson presents a reason why this can be your best year. A lot of people look around and measure a good year by how much money you made, how much you prospered materially. But the Bible doesn't do it that way. A lot of false teachers will say if you prosper materially, that's a sign that God has blessed you. And if you didn't prosper materially, that's a sign God didn't bless you. That's all wrong. Jesus did not emphasize that. Now, we are to be thankful if we are materially blessed. We're to be thankful even if we're not materially blessed. I hope that we're thankful either way, that we've learned either way to be content in whatever state we're in. Paul said that in Philippians, that he learned that. It's a learning process that we're going through. This year we'll learn some more. And as we're going through a learning process, we're learning how to see things in the right way. Now, the book of Revelation was written to a group of churches in the first century that needed to see things the right way. One of them, Laodicea, said, "We're rich and we have need of nothing." John was writing so that they could see things the right way. Among the things that help us to see things correctly is to see it through the eyes of the Lord. He reveals what He thinks about things, and that helps us to see things in the right way. Well, this lesson is going to present the key to us seeing our year and our life, if we have a year. I don't know that we have it. And that's part of seeing things correctly too, is to realize this life is short and it's uncertain. The only thing that we have to deal with is today. But today we can kind of focus things in the right way. We can get our mind's eye adjusted so that we're looking correctly at what life we may have ahead for us. And I hope that it will be wise to open our Bible and actually think about these very important statements. Well, verse 8 makes this statement because he wanted the readers to first understand who it is that they're dealing with. If you don't have a correct vision, that is an internal understanding of the Lord and His role that is to be played out in your life, then you will not see life correctly. And so what we're going to do is see that Jesus wants us, as well as the first readers, to understand who He is. And He says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega." Now that may be strange to us, because we may not understand why He described Himself that way. The Alpha is the beginning of the Greek alphabet. In fact, our English word alphabet comes from two Greek words joined together. It's like the ABCs, except we're just doing AB, the alphabet. The second letter in the Greek alphabet is beta. Alpha, beta. That's the word from which we get alphabet. Now, our alphabet starts with A and goes to Z. But the Greek alphabet started with Alpha and went to Omega. Omega being the last letter in the Greek alphabet. So we got the first and the last. Jesus is the Alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet. And Jesus is the Omega, the last letter in the Greek alphabet. Another way for us to think about that is to think in terms of our alphabet. That would be like saying that Jesus is the A to Z. Jesus is the A to Z of living successfully in this world that's challenging us. This is a challenging ground. But don't get lost in the challenges that you face. And don't get discouraged because you're facing difficulties. You just realize that what you're going to deal with in this life is Jesus being the A, the beginning, and Jesus being the end, and everything in between. He is the total of the way you are to think about living in this world. So, Jesus is the secret. He is the revealed way for us to deal with our world and to deal with the complications and the difficulties of our world, is to recognize Jesus is the start of it and Jesus is the finish of it. And everything in between is His as well. Now, in Colossians chapter 1, we're going to look at Jesus being the beginning and the end and the middle. Philippians chapter 1, look at verse 16. It says, by Him, that is by Jesus, who is the invisible, who is the image of the invisible God in verse 15, He is the firstborn over all creation. And verse 16 says, for by Him, that is by Jesus, all things were created. The world began. Jesus is the reason the world, the creation began. All of creation is because of Jesus. He made it all. For by Him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth. Things you see and things you don't see. Visible and invisible. And He's the reason there are thrones and dominions and principalities and powers. All things were created through Jesus, and everything was created for Jesus. That means your little life, from A to Z, from beginning to end, is because of Jesus. Now don't forget, your life is because of Jesus. All of creation is because of Him. It's through Him that it began. It'll be because of Him that it comes to a conclusion. It comes to an end. So what about everything in between? What about your little gap of time? Well, the beginning of your spiritual life all the way to the end of your earthly life, all of that needs to be focused on Jesus as your Alpha, your beginning, and your ending. And once we understand that and begin to live like we understand that, then our beginning and ending will be sufficiently supplied by the one who is the author of it and the finisher of it. Because He is, verse 17, before all things. So He's before it all. He's therefore the beginning of it. And in Him all things consist. Everything holds together. Why does our planet, and why is there gravitational pull that keeps the water on this globe instead of just floating out into space? It's because of Jesus. He made it this way. And He made your life for a purpose. And once we understand that, we've got the beginning of our spiritual life readily in hand, because we know Jesus is going to be with us from beginning to end. Now, we can handle a lot of things with that. We can handle a lot of difficulty if we get that centered correctly. Not only that, but Jesus says there's going to be a last day. John chapter 12, verse 48, the words that I've spoken to you are going to judge you in the last day. All right, so what are you to do from the beginning of your spiritual life when you're united with Jesus together in baptism? And you rise up from that watery grave and you're united now with Jesus. And so your new life begins with Jesus now. It's together with Him. What are you to do with that? Well, you're to realize that it's one day, there's going to be a last day. So in the meantime, I've got to use His Word that's going to judge me in the last day. And I've got to hold tightly in my walk with Jesus. I've got to hold to Him tightly. Don't let loose of that. And don't lose sight of who He is. Then He's the beginning of it all. And He will carry us through to the end of it all. See, He's the beginning of the creation. And He will be there at the end of this creation. Not only that, but you look at your Bible. The reason it begins with in the beginning God created is because it wants us to know that there is somebody who put it all in operation. And if He was concerned enough to build this universe and then put humans on this earth, He had a reason for that. In the beginning, then, God started out with letting us see a dark world, and then how God, the first thing that He wants us to see is light. Light in a dark world. Why does He want us to see that? Because He wants us to understand there is darkness, there is light. That's going to be your experience in this world. You're going to experience dark days, and you're going to experience days of light. And so He put it on operation so you could see it. Then He goes on and creates man, and then He places the first couple in this beautiful paradise. And as long as they kept themselves from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they had access to the tree of life. When they sinned, God says, no, you can't live eternally now. Now we're going to have to experience death because you allowed sin to take place. Sin came into the world and made a beautiful paradise become less appealing, but still good enough for us to see the goodness of God and also realize that it is a sin-cursed world. There will be dark times. The ground will be cursed. The human experience will have a lot of difficulty. We will experience death. And when death is our experience, we wake up and realize, hey, we're going to die. We're all going to die. We see death taking place all around us. In our experience, it pains us to no end. But it's a wake-up call for us to realize there is light in this darkness. All right, so the story of the Bible then begins with the curse of man and the ground, and then gives us a picture of the coming remedy. The seed of the woman is coming. And when the seed of the woman comes, he will do some repair work over the work that Satan brought into the human experience. In chapter 12 of Genesis, he says to Abraham, it will be a great blessing. A blessing is coming, but it's going to come through Abraham and then through Isaac and Jacob and then through Judah and trickle down all the way until the Messiah comes. And when he comes through the children of Judah, the world will experience a great blessing to help us deal with the difficulties of the human experience. our experience, what you're experiencing now, can be handled only if you begin to come to Christ, develop a union with Him in baptism, and then rise up with this togetherness with Him. That's the story of the Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, it's all about everybody needs Jesus in the Old Testament. Everybody can have Jesus now in the New Testament. And so it's all about Jesus. Jesus is the beginning of creation. Jesus is the beginning of the story of man's need for Jesus from the beginning. And all the way through the book of Revelation, we have Jesus being everything from beginning to end and everything in the middle. Now that middle part, that's where you and I are. The story of our journey. My little journey started in March the 21st, 1955. I don't know when this journey will come to an end. But the story of a successful journey for me and for you would be to begin somewhere along the line to realize I need Jesus and I need to walk with Jesus. I need to unite with Him and begin a walk with Him. And then I've got to finish out this journey with Jesus. You see, Jesus is the beginning of a Christian, a person who is going to overcome the world. So the book of Revelation starts out with 7 letters or to 7 churches and tells them that if you'll be an overcomer, here's what will be your reward. And it gives a list of those things in chapter 2 and 3 of Revelation. So the story of each Christian and how a Christian can walk with Jesus successfully, and walking with Jesus enables you and empowers you to be an overcomer, then your beginning and your end will be successful. And if you don't walk with Jesus, and if you do not develop faith in Jesus, your journey will have been a waste. We don't want it to end in a waste. We want it to end with us united with Jesus all the way. The story of how we live for Jesus Christ. Your story is being written right now. You remember Paul writing in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, telling the Corinthian brethren that you are our epistle, and you're known and read of by all men. People look at you because you're a story. But your story is written from A to Z by the letters that Jesus has provided. Each of the letters of the alphabet, from A to Z or from Alpha to Omega, has got to be a story that you're writing that is a diary of your journey with Jesus. So you're writing a page. And today is page 1 of this year. Page 1 is your journey from this day forward and how you're going to know Jesus better than you have before. Day 1, what are you writing in your story of life? You are an epistle, and people are going to read your story at the end. What will your story say? That you didn't walk with Jesus or that you did walk with Him? Make sure from Alpha to Omega that your story is a story that is written through the influence of Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. The story of your faith in Christ. What is your story saying right now? Does it speak of your faithfulness to Him? Does it speak of your loyalty to Him? What is your story? And what's it going to be tomorrow? Are you going to get up and start a new day, because every day is a new day in Jesus Christ. And my story is not going to be exclusive of Jesus. It's going to be about me and Jesus. Isn't that a wonderful way to start a new year? Is to start making sure that I'm penning in my book of life the story from A to Z about me and Jesus the rest of this journey. The story is about your faith or the lack of faith. He authored you. That is, He's got us started, didn't He? He's the author of it. Philippians chapter 12 speaks to it this way. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let's lay that aside. I mean, you can't go into this new year and still carry the burdens of yesterday. So what we're going to do is lay those things aside, because this is the start of a new year of me and Jesus, of you and Jesus. And I'm going to lay that aside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run forward. I'm going to move in the right direction with the rest of my life, whatever length of time that is. But I'm going to run with endurance. That is, I can see that I'm going to need this much energy to make it to the end. I've got to have this much spiritual assets going for me, spiritual supply, for me to finish out this course. Now, Jesus gives us the supply. We've got to engage that supply. So we've got to run with endurance the race that is set before us. And what we've got to do is we've got to look unto Jesus. I mean, this has got to be the rest of our journey now, because He got us started in this faith. I believe in Him because of Jesus and who He is, the evidence of Him. And therefore, I've got to finish this on out. So we've got to run with endurance, looking to Jesus the whole way. I don't look away from Him. If I do, I'll be like Peter, I'll sink. But looking unto Jesus, the author, the one that got me started, is the one that's going to help me finish this. He's the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross. He endured some things. Yes, He even endured death. He endured because He had something in Him to help Him endure that. And so what He did is He despised the shame. That is, I look at this shameful thing that I'm experiencing now, and I despise it, and therefore I'm going to get through it, because I'm not going to let that be my story, the end of my story. So what He does is He despises the shame, and He sees Himself going all the way through all of this shame and sitting down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now that's your story. Are you writing it? Are you writing it well? Are you beginning, and are you seeing yourself walking this road with Jesus? You see, He was at the center of the early Christians' lives who were overcomers. That's the reason they overcame. He must be at the center of your heart. Going from this day forward, if it's not already there, let's make sure from this day forward that the center of my own desires and wishes for this world is to make sure that I'm supplied well, that I use the supplies Jesus has provided, so that with Him I can finish this. I need to finish it. And I started out because I had good reason to believe in Him, and I still have good reason to believe in Him. And I must not let the difficulties and the challenges of this world choke out those precious realities that He's provided. All right, so Paul's story, let's look at him just for a moment. Paul's story of the way Jesus authored his faith is described in the book of Acts. I'm just going to briefly mention this just to illustrate that it's pretty much the same with all of us. That Jesus is the one that gets us started. Jesus authored Paul's faith. For a while, he didn't believe in Jesus. But then when he began to believe in Jesus, he lived totally different than he used to live. And he lived with a lot more purpose and a lot more satisfaction. It was Paul and Jesus. Emphasize the word "and," because this has got to be a journey of you, not you alone, but you and Jesus. His journey then looks something like this. In brief, you see him preaching Jesus because he believed in Jesus. You see him singing about Jesus, despite the fact that he's thrown in prison at Philippi. You see, that's not how he lives his story. His story is one of living for Jesus. And so he is singing. See, Jesus got him started. And Jesus is carrying him through the difficulty of his human experience. He's singing. And he's singing praise because the darkness of his human experience is not that's not the way he's going to look at his story. It's not the way that it's going to get started. It didn't get started. It got started because Jesus is his Alpha and Jesus is his Omega. And so you see him journeying through, and he goes through lots of difficulties, and he describes those in 2 Corinthians 4, that I got through all of this, and yes, it was a low moment, but it didn't crush me. And why? Because I was always looking to Jesus. That's the secret. He learned to look to Jesus through hardship and persecution, rejection. He says, this is a journey of me and Jesus. Not a journey of me by myself. This is a journey of me and Jesus. So at the time of his death, he wasn't all that concerned. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, he says, the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have kept the faith. And incidentally, by keeping the faith keeps him. It was his belief in Jesus that got him through all of those difficulties. And even in death itself, he says, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me in that day. Not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing. You're going to be one of those who writes your story, is that I'm going to be one who loves the appearing of Jesus. If he comes today, if he comes tomorrow, or if death takes me away from this life, whichever way it works, it's going to be my journey, not by myself, but with Jesus. So, let's resolve what the story is going to be. This is going to be you and Jesus together. This is going to be your story because you were converted to Jesus. He authored your faith. And then you're going to see him as the Alpha, the one who began your faith, and then you're going to see him as your Omega, the one who carries you through to the end of your journey. Your story has got to be you and Jesus. You and Jesus walking together. Picture yourself walking through the valleys. Sometimes you walk through the valleys of the shadow of death, but you don't fear any evil because he's with you. He's with you. It's you and Jesus walking up the hills. It's you and Jesus training you, and you and Jesus dealing with the hardship. That I can do this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's you and Jesus dealing with hardship. It's you and Jesus in training to be an overcomer. I'm not going to let this whip me. I'm going to be more than a conqueror through Him who loved me. That's you and Jesus being an overcomer. Him training you through some lesser problems to get you stronger so you can deal with hardship. But it's you and Jesus. It's you and Jesus together at the end of your journey. That's the story that we must write, brethren. We must write this story. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He's what your story is about. He's the reason your story began with Jesus. He's the reason your story is written the way it's being written, because you're walking with Jesus. And He'll be the reason you'll end your life successfully with Jesus. Jesus must be your Alpha and Omega. This morning, if you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus, is Jesus the A to Z of your story? How do you want your story of life to go? What does each page that you'll add on from here on out? Will it begin with Jesus, and will it go all the way through to the end with Jesus? Have you let Him begin your faith? Have you listened to the gospel? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Romans 10:17. That's the way it begins. That's the evidence of Jesus. He begins your journey of faith. Are you letting Him sustain your faith? By that I mean, when Paul was with the elders of Ephesus in Acts 20, he says, I commend you to the word of His grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among those. He's the one that's going to help sustain your faith. You see, it's able. He's able. And His word is able. But we've got to be involved in it. Every step of the way. Every day you begin a day with Jesus. And write your diary. It was me and Jesus handling this today. It was me and Jesus handling this. And you go through each day, and it's you and Jesus handling the story. Will you be letting Him finish your story? A story of faith. If you've not begun, and we can help you begin, if you need to repent of sins, confess your faith in Him, and be baptized into union with Him to begin a good story, a successful story, then don't harden your heart. Now's the time to resolve to do what's going to help you the rest of your journey. Can we help you in any way? Please come as we stand together and sing this song.